comes along. Are we back? We are back in Quarantini. Well, thank you everybody for hanging in there, if you did hang in. And for those of you who went off to get some fish and chips or stations in the offing.
All right, so video is still giving us trouble, but sound is still fine. So I think we're just going to ride it out for a couple of minutes, see how it goes.
Yeah.
Here is a question from Richard. Some good things going between the 1 and the 4, but when it comes to the 5, 9 times out of 10 it falls apart, and I resort to the same old phrases. The 6, 2 5s are a bit better. Do you have any suggestions?
Depends what key you're playing in. You know, it's good to practice in all the keys, really. Left hand on a piano. You know, if you're playing in a band, then the left hand department is really taken up by the bass drum and the bass player. But if you're playing solo gigs or you're playing at home for your own pleasure, then really that's where the joy is in the left hand in the bass department. And if you're playing boogie woogie, if you're playing in C, it's the same pattern. Well, there are several patterns, but it's the same basic shapes. That's C, that's F, it's the same shape. Here's the 5, G. Boom 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 bum boom 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 pop baby boom 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 better boom boom better boom boom better boom boom better boom 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 boom. That's it. That was basically the horn line from a Fats Domino record where they copped the left hand. And that's a good New Orleans left hand boogie piano pattern, but you can play it all kinds of ways. And the thing is, you just got to play it. Start off by playing it. Don't try and play it too fast. Don't try and run before you can walk, because when you go to the 5 chord, you just got to jump in there. You got to jump in there quick, so you make that positive, strong statement at the beginning of that bar, because the 5 chord's really important. But it really depends what the riff you're playing. I'd have to actually see what you're playing to really offer up any really valuable commentary there. But boogie is a great thing. There's lots of variety in boogie woogie, and this left-hand pattern is kind of fun too. We go. It just drives the thing along. When piano players used to have to play and entertain a room full of people by themselves, you had to really handle your business in the left-hand department, because that's what made people get up and dance. The ornamentation's all up here, you know, the... You're doing all that stuff, but underneath you've got to emulate a drummer and a bass player. So that's kind of what the bass drum is doing, and that's the backbeat right there. And that's boogie woogie, but I like the New Orleans R&B thing, because you use both hands and it kind of slows down a little bit and just gets a little bit more sophisticated, a bit more interesting. That's the rumba. And that's really where the funk comes in when you start playing that New Orleans stuff. This stuff, it's really great. It's very driving, but it's not funky. Funk is syncopation. And so that comes in with... all that stuff where you put strong emphasis on odd beats, odd fractions of 4. And that's where it gets interesting. And there's no real particular pattern for that. You just kind of play it and feel it. And but you are doing the same thing. Essentially, you're emulating the bass player and the drummer. It's just that when you emulate bass players and drummers in New Orleans, if you're going to do it properly, you better be pretty funky.
Okay, we have a Harry Whitty who is asking if you have any Henry Butler stories.
Any Henry Butler stories? Not any sort of hilariously witty anecdotes particularly. I liked Henry a lot, and we did a few gigs together in far-flung places. We did a thing with a few other New Orleans musicians in Denmark, teaching at the Conservatory of Music one year, which was fun, and we got to hang out a little bit. And I did a tour with Henry Butler and Alan Toussaint, 3 piano players, out on the West. And that was nice, getting to hang out a little bit and getting to know him a little bit better. And the last time I saw Henry was in New York when he came to a gig I was doing at a little joint in Brooklyn called the Bar Lunatico, great little bar in Brooklyn. And he came and sat in and played with me on a few tunes. And then he passed away shortly afterwards. So Henry was a very interesting guy, very bright. I think, I might be mistaken, but I think he's originally from Baton Rouge and grew up in New Orleans. I'm not really sure. But Henry had a classical technique as a pianist and as a singer too. He sang with an operatic technique and was very dexterous and very fast. And one time when he was playing, Alan Toussaint was standing next to me. We were standing in the wings watching Henry play. And Alan looked over at me and said, "Do you think Henry's getting paid by the note tonight?" Because he was just wailing and just playing 1,000,000 notes a second. And it was kind of dazzling. But, yeah, very eccentric character, real personality, Henry Butler, like most of the musicians down here in New Orleans.
We have a Laurie McSpadden who just...
Hey, Laurie.
Just asking, so Frenchman Street Blues has a great backstory. Would you please share why you wrote it and then play the amazing song? All
right, Frenchman Street Blues. I wrote that here. Well, actually, about 6 feet over there. The studio was a raw space, and when I moved in right before the storm, a friend of mine who was a builder and was an artist who lived on Frenchman Street agreed to help me turn it into a studio, which involved lots of framing in and sheetrocking and running electrical cable, all sorts of stuff. And a really good guy. He was a friend of a friend. That's how I met him first of all, a connection through the Maple Leaf Bar. And but he lived downtown here, like I do, and we became good friends. We worked together a little bit. I helped him out trying to save money by carrying some of the sheetrock and doing some of the siding. There was all sorts of work to do. Everyone had a lot of work to do after Katrina. It was a bad hurricane, a lot of damage to everybody's houses. So if you knew someone that was handy and could carpent, then that was very valuable. And he was fantastic, and would always do. He got it done. And then one day he didn't show up, and it was very unlike him. And I went round to him, knocked on the door, and he looked very pale. In fact, it had been a few days since he'd been around. And he died shortly afterwards. He'd had cancer without knowing it. And in some ways, it was kind of merciful, really, because he lived his life right up till the end and then checked out really quickly. And funerals are sad affairs, but in New Orleans, they tend to try and squeeze out all the positive. And at his funeral, I couldn't attend, very sadly, because I had to fly out that day to a gig that was already booked. But I thought one way I could contribute something would be to write a song and just record a quick version of it. And it was literally written in 10 minutes. And I recorded it, burnt it onto a CD, and then went off to the airport. And it was played at his funeral on Frenchman Street. Because he said he wanted his ashes scattered on Frenchman Street. And, in New Orleans place names, there's a lot to work with if you're lyrically inclined. And every line in that song is about Mark and about Frenchman Street. And the first line is... scatter my ashes on Frenchman Street. Don't be upset at the news. Cut me loose with a soulful song, but don't play no Frenchman Street blues. I think he didn't want it to be... Knowing Mark, I think he would have wanted more of a jazz funeral kind of send-off. So that line, cut me loose with a soulful song. In New Orleans jazz funerals, when the hearse leaves the church, eventually after they've brought the coffin out, after the sad part, after everybody said their farewells, they put the coffin out, they bring it out to the sound of a dirge, played by the band outside. And once they've loaded the coffin into the hearse and the hearse takes off, that's called cutting. You cut him loose. And that's really the moment he's gone at that point. And that's when the trumpet blasts out and you say, right, enough crying. Let's celebrate the good life he had, and he's going off to a better place. New Orleans is a Catholic city, and that's the way they say goodbye to the musicians. So they're like, cut me loose with a soulful song, but don't play no Frenchman Street blues. Hitch me a ride on a river breeze to Elysian fields so green. So that line right there, hitch me a ride on a river breeze. I'm just imagining them scattering the ashes out. And there is a breeze. This Frenchman Street goes almost all the way to the river. And the idea of scattering the ashes and then the breeze carrying them one block over from Frenchman Street is Elysian Fields Avenue. And in Greek mythology, Elysian Fields in French, anyone that's familiar with Paris, is the Champs-Élysées. The fields of Elysia. It's Greek mythology. It was the Greek version of, I guess, of heaven, essentially. Elysian Fields, the pastures of Elysia, where it was a beautiful place to go to after you'd crossed over into the next life. And as I say, Elysian Fields Avenue is one block from Frenchman Street. So you scatter the ashes, hitch me a ride on a river breeze to Elysian field so green. And I'll join the spirits looking down a smile on the back streets of old New Orleans. I like that idea of him joining all the spirits, all the people I know that passed on. It's a lovely idea. I don't really believe it, but it's a nice idea that they're all up there somehow looking down and smiling, especially all the carryings on and goings on Frenchman Street in New Orleans. To the bridge. And the lyrics go, I did my time in the masquerade. And I turned the rough into smooth. Whenever I saw Mark, he always had a piece of wood and a bit of sandpaper. And the masquerade, of course, is Mardi Gras. It's a reference to all the masked balls at Mardi Gras. I did my time in the masquerade, which is a metaphor for life. And I ran the rough into smooth. So he turned, he did good stuff. Made good stuff out of bad stuff. Paint me a canvas. Paint me a canvas of peace of mind. But don't play no Frenchman Street blues. He was an artist. He had canvases when he went to his apartment. It was full of canvases. So paint me a canvas of peace of mind. I like the idea of being able to paint peace of mind. And I think that's what he got when he was painting. And then the last verse, it goes to a solo at that point. And this chord change is, I didn't invent this, it's been used millions of times in different songs, but it still works its wonders. And what's going on musically is that this is an F major 7th chord. Musicians will know what that means, but people that don't know what that means, it's a very gentle, I always think it was quite a feminine chord. It's kind of got soft, round, cuddly bits, and but it's interesting because it contains the two most basic elements of that chord are notes that, when played solely by themselves, actually sound to a non-musician very out of tune, quite painful, in fact. You think that's the kind of thing you play on a piano that's like fingers on a blackboard. It's called dissonance. Dissonance is something contrary, it's upset, it's turmoil, it's something wrong that needs to be righted. But if you introduce two other notes to that chord, you go from something that has all those negative connotations, aggressive, jagged, ugly, ragged, dangerous, and you add these two notes, and it transforms it to the complete opposite of that. It goes from this to this. Because you add this note, and that's called a major 7th. A major 7th chords, they're used in a lot of soul music, kind of Barry White, love songs, sexy songs, wistful songs, dreamy songs. And then you do that, and that's a minor 7th. And that is loaded because now we're going somewhere, and it goes. And so you have this melody, it goes like this. And because it's already, when it embarks on that, it's establishing a sort of a mathematical pattern, and you kind of almost know what's coming next. So it's kind of good in songwriting to hint at what's coming next, because then the listener's ear is rewarded when that chord actually does come. And one of the tricks of being a songwriter is to lead the listener to expect something, but then to do something different and to withhold that payoff. In this particular song, unusual here. So these are jazz chords, but it's a blues tune. But New Orleans always used jazz, quite sophisticated harmonic ideas when they played the blues. Not rough blues like Mississippi or Texas or Chicago. It's New Orleans blues is more gentle. So the very last verse. I'll meet you one night in your sultry dreams. Let's drink me a toast as you snooze. And I'll close out my tab at the happy hour. Let go. And let go. Let go of these, my Frenchman Street blues. You know, the happy hour. Close out my tab at the happy hour. That's kind of what he did, really. Like I say, he didn't know he was ill, and just felt rough one day, and a few days later he was gone. So he kind of checked out without having had years of foreboding and dreading the final day, I suppose. I don't really know. But anyway, that's the background to that song, Frenchman Street Blues, a little breakdown of the chords and the lyrics. Yeah.
In keeping with that, Laurie McSpadden again was wondering if we could do the Port Street Blues.
That's a lot of blues. I'm worried people are going to go, oh, God, not another blues. Pick it up a little bit. Port Street Blues. Port Street Blues is about a joint I used to live in. It was an old grocery store on Charters and Port Street. I think it's a bakery now, or a Vietnamese restaurant or something. But it looked like, oh man, I don't know. Perhaps that should be for the next time, because I would need to spend a lot of time really going through that one. If I started breaking down the lyrics to that one. Anyway, I'll give you a little taste of one aspect of it, which is, when you play a blues, the most basic blues, and good too, good blues, have basically 3 chords. I mean, and they can be rough and... You wanna see my baby when she walk down the street, upsetting everybody she meets. And it's got 3 chords. A bit like what we were talking about earlier on with the boogie. So, but you can make blues very ornate. And the one I just played, Frenchman Street Blues, is really just me experimenting with the form and squeezing lots of sentimental flavors out of jazz chords. And Port Street Blues is a little bit similar, but Port Street Blues does a thing where it's interesting. It modulates. Musicians use this term, modulating. It basically, essentially means changing key. But it happens in such a way that the ear is not quite sure that it's changed key, because it's very gentle. Sometimes in songs, it's kind of a bit of a corny device. You don't hear it used very much now, but sometimes in songs, in order to give them a lift, in the old days, people would change the key. So if you had a song that was in this key, it would suddenly go, oh, da, 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 da. And sometimes they would get to it by throwing another chord in between to soften the jarring aspect of it a little bit. Well, Port Street Blues changes key. Camelback Riverside Shack, a Creole shotgun little yard out back. Cool breeze and rigolizing, blowing through my banana trees, yawling. Rusty freight ship drifting in. It gets interesting. From an ocean far away. Cast long shadows on my back porch. At the sad time of day. I'm trying to tell you about a little feeling this poor bar can't lose. And now we're in E flat, we've modulated. You could easily stay there. And you don't even really realize that it's changed key. This is the original key. But now we've gone to here. But it doesn't stop there. When I get to that point, I go. And I modulate back. So it modulates twice in the form. And the chord progressions are kind of interesting, and we could really look at them if we had time. But I'm afraid I might scare everybody away if I did that. But it's about. It was written in exile when I was living in England, and I wrote it in Cranbrook in Kent, at my mum and dad's house, where I was staying, trying to get a visa to get back home to New Orleans, feeling homesick, and that's what it is. It's a homesick blues for a wonderful funky old joint. It used to be called Bird's Grocery. It's the place. There's an album I make called Alligator Lips and Dirty Rice, and that picture is of that's the original Funk Headquarters. That's right there on Port Street. That's the original. That's the building that Port Street Blues is about.
All right, Anne Elizabeth Byrne.
Hey Anne, how you doing?
Has asked if you knew Reuben by Johnny Guitar Watson. If not, I'm sure another Johnny Guitar Watson tune will do quite nicely.
I don't really do that one. It's good. All his stuff is good. Really. There's not really such a thing. There's no such thing as a bad Johnny Watson tune. Although some are badder than others. Johnny Watson. His name was Johnny Guitar Watson. He needed a name and he was a piano player and wanted to start playing guitar because he felt on stage behind the piano he couldn't flirt with all the girls. And so he wanted a electric guitar with a long cable so he could get out and walk around in the audience. And he went to see a Western movie called Johnny Guitar. And that's where he got the idea, Johnny Guitar Watson. But a lot of people don't realize that he was actually a great piano player, and he played a lot of keyboards on a lot of his records. And he was a jazz lover. I think, given his druthers, he would sit for hours and emulate guys like Oscar Peterson and Errol Garner. Johnny Guitar. We do a couple of Johnny Guitar Watson tunes on the gig. One is called Superman Lover. It's got this great introduction. And he would love these big chords. And early on when I was telling you about in Frenchman Street Blues, the F major 7th. That's an F major 7th. That's the first chord. Scatter my ashes on Frenchman Street. If you play that F major 7th, if you play a G on the bass, now all of a sudden, you get this really interesting thing happening where the root note on the bottom tells you what the chord is. It's very assertive, but the chord you're playing in the right hand doesn't contain any elements of a G major chord. This is a G major chord. And what you're doing here with this chord is you're playing, instead of this, you're playing this. Instead of this, you're playing this. Instead of this, you're playing this. And then you're adding this on top. And he used to really dig doing things like taking that and then going up a half step. And what that is essentially different names for that chord. You call it 11 or 13. But the best way of describing it is as a suspended chord. It keeps you in suspense because what you really, when you hear that chord, what you want to happen is for this note to resolve to this. And when you do that, you create with a musical instrument the sensation that something's not quite right, but we're going to fix it. And then you do this. There it is. And somehow all's right in the world. And Johnny Guitar Watson was a master of that. He was a master of a lot of things. Great musician, Johnny Guitar Watson. Check him out. Check out anything by Johnny Watson, really. But Johnny Watson, just one thing, Johnny Watson was really interesting because he essentially spanned the history of rhythm and blues. His very first records were on 78, heavy shellac, and the mid-50s. And the name on the records was Young John Watson and His Orchestra. And his very last record he made, I can remember seeing a young little black kid in the Treme neighborhood of New Orleans, carrying a big sound system and getting down and dancing to Bow Wow by Johnny Guitar Watson. And so he was like hip-hopping with the best of them right at the end. But he was always one step ahead of the mainstream audience, and so he never really made it big, apart from one album called Real Mother For You.
All right, Robbie Mendelson?
Yeah. Hey, Robbie.
Is wanting to know about Zulu Strut, if we could hear Zulu Strut, if it wouldn't ruin this particular vibe we have going right now.
Have you got a vibe going on? Well, Zulu Strut's really a guitar tune. Ba-ba-doo-boom, ba-ba-doo-boom-boom. And it's a guitar tune that I wrote on a guitar, strangely enough. And it utilizes the open strings of the guitar. And so it doesn't really work quite as well on a piano, but and I like that. The way with the guitar you can do that and make the strings all resonate. And a bit like what we're talking about with major seventh chords, and it actually is a major. There it is. And it's kind of interesting because when we went to play at, me and my band went over to England to play at Ronnie Scott's jazz club. Actually, we were over there doing a television show for Jules Holland, which is filmed not far from the village where I grew up. And so once we got the filming out of the way, we jumped in the car and drove to the Bell and Jorrocks in Frittenden for a drink and stayed that night. I got fellas for the room in the local inn. And it was a Saturday night. And I met them in the pub the next day on Sunday. And they said, man, we know where you got that riff for that Zulu Strut thing from. And I said, what do you mean? He said, we've been listening to it all morning. And he said, it's the church bells here in the village. And it actually was. I thought maybe that's where the idea came from. Because when I was a little child, I used to, get sent to go to bed early, really little, like as a baby. And on Sundays, I would listen to the bell ringers practicing. And they would practice on Sunday late afternoons, early evenings. It was still daylight. And I'd be lying there wide awake, trying to get to sleep. And in the village, you could hear. And it was beautifully irregular because it's an ancient church, St. Dunstan's Church, 1,000 years old probably. And the bell ringers would hoik these great big ropes with enormous bells up at the bell tower, and pull them down, and they would ring, and it was all very random, but you could hear it for miles around. So I think that is where I stumbled across that thing, and it meant something to me, but I didn't realize until many years later. Well, I think it's about that time. Do you have any more questions there to lead the people off with? You have a question, Chris?
May I make a request?
Yeah.
A non-New Orleans, relatively well-known song that you have in your repertoire that you give the New Orleans treatment to. Do you have anything like that?
Oh, God. Well, I probably do, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I mean, I learnt to play piano here in New Orleans, really. I mean, I fooled around with it when I was a kid, but when I came here is when I started taking it seriously. So I learnt New Orleans piano. I played what I heard, and I heard lots of old records and went to find old piano players, and that's what I learned. So that's my default mode, and it's actually kind of quite hard for me sometimes to not play New Orleans style. And there's such a big book.
Well, Johnny Guitar Watson might do. I mean, he's not considered like necessarily a New Orleans artist, but
No, not really. But he used to hang around with Larry Williams, who was from New Orleans, and he dug New Orleans. He loved New Orleans. I know that for a fact. So his stuff has got a bit of a New Orleans vibe to it anyway. Let me think about that one for next week. That'd be a good thing to ponder on. Everybody, thank you so much for watching. Sorry I had trouble with the machines. I think it's because it's so bloody hot down here. That I'm making it through. Chris is all right, but the computer's protesting loudly.
Trish is asking for a song as we fade into the night. Love Will Keep Us Together. Is what Trish is asking for.
All right. Well, here's essentially a very corny song by Captain and Tennille from the 70s. And she laughs because I actually think this song sounds like a great New Orleans tune. Like Alan Toussaint could have written it. But I would really need to know all the words to put it up. Thank you, Trish, for dropping that bomb on me right as I'm about to go and stir the spag bol upstairs. Love will keep us together. Love will keep us together. Think of me, baby, whenever some sweet gal comes walking around. I don't remember the words. And just stop, 'cause I'm thinking of you. Stop. That's just a good example of a song that has the corny key change. It goes. Yeah, that is actually a great song. Sometimes you have great songs that have been forever tarnished with the corny brush. I don't know. You could do the funkiest version of that, but you might not be able to wash off the corny associations. But good song. All right, everybody. Thank you to all of those who generously tip in the tip jar. That's how we keep this thing going. Try to keep it going. Anyway, we'll try and keep it going. The details for the Patreon site there too, which is something you might want to check out if you're a fan of this kind of music. And thank you. Good night to you all. A wave of good night to my family up in New York, and my family in England who will probably be watching this tomorrow. And bid you good night and see you Thursday for the early one, which we do for European Quarantinians. And that's it, basically. On that bombshell, I shall bid you adieu and go upstairs to stir the spag bol.